Well, that's great news. Boy.
Yeah, I'll hand it off to you.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everybody. If you have any gardening tips for 8,000 feet above altitude or above sea level, please let me know. Welcome to the final event in this year's Housing and Health Speaker Series. This series was designed to bring opportunity, equity, and education to Chaffee County, highlighting policy and systems changes that can address housing affordability and therefore our community's long-term health outcomes. These events have been funded by a grant from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment's Office of Health Equity and are a partnership between your county offices of public health and housing. This event is a revisit to a prior event we had this year regarding conservation subdivision design. And I am so glad to see that many of you are joining this conversation today. I'd also like to thank all of the people on our housing and health team who helped put this all together. Andrea Karlstrom, who is not with us today because she was able to carve out a day off. So everybody should be grateful that Andrea has found a bit of personal time in the middle of a pandemic. In addition to Andrea, the team includes Lisa Martin, Heather Gorby, and Janie Hayes, who have all worked magic to bring us together this afternoon. So thanks to all the work you are doing in this community. This speaker series is intended not only to focus on improving housing options, but also to help address the social inequities that exist right here in Chaffee County. It is part of the state of Colorado's Health Disparities Grant Program. If you have not been able to join us for prior events, or if you would like to revisit some of the conversations, you can find recordings of a few of the presentations on a web page that was newly created for this purpose. It is housinghealthchaffee.org. You can also take a deeper dive and listen to Ken Matthews and John Prey of KHEN interview all of our speakers on the Chaffee Housing Report. You can find a link to a podcast of the Chaffee Housing Report on the KHEN website. So for this afternoon, I would like to just provide you with an overview of what to expect and how we're going to facilitate this event. So many of us are becoming really accustomed to Zoom. And this time we have a professional host helping. Jennifer Withrow with Align Virtual Solutions is operating the technical aspects of the evening. Thank you, Jennifer. I'm so glad you're here.
My pleasure.
She is also recording this event, and we will place it on the housinghealthchaffee.org website so you can watch it again and share it with your friends. As audience members, you are all muted, which simply means that if you talk, we won't hear you. But we do want to hear from you. So I invite you to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. So if you have questions now or during the presentation, you can ask them at any time by clicking on Q&A at the bottom of the screen, type in your message, hit enter, and the question will come to me. After we finish watching and listening to Randall explain conservation subdivision development, I will ask the questions you've submitted on your behalf. So feel free to jump in anytime and ask away. Another Zoom feature that we will be using tonight is real-time polling. Jennifer, would you please launch the first poll? So you should all be seeing on your screen a series of questions, and I'm going to ask you to go ahead and start filling in your answers. While you are doing that, I can tell you that your answers are anonymous and they will help us meet our grant reporting requirements. Part of the grant's initiative is to increase our community's capacity for understanding a variety of land use topics. And so you'll see questions about how familiar you are with this before the event and how familiar you are with this after the event. And that helps us measure that increase in capacity. In addition, we're asking how important these topics are to you and how important it is that your policies and systems at a local level reflect these kinds land use strategies. And that is important because we're going to compile this data into a final report that will be shared with all of the jurisdictions in the county. That's why we're also asking what community you align with, so that when we report out to your community, we can use data from people who live there to make policy recommendations or suggestions. So as soon as we see that all of the participants have answered, or the majority have answered, we can close the poll.
So we'll give everybody just a few more minutes. Just make sure that you scroll forward. There are a total of 6 questions to this poll.
Back when we were hosting these events in person and having dinner, we were able to lure people in with the delicious food, and then we were able to capture your survey results on paper by posting volunteers at the door. So I hope that this polling opportunity is a much more convenient way to go about capturing your input.
And we're getting closer. We have a few more participants still voting. And we'll be sharing with these results in a few moments, but I will say that as far as how familiar you are with the concepts, it looks like we're across the board on that last question.
That's great. So Randall, you have some novices and you have some slightly seasoned participants.
Good, good.
I have a question that says, quote unquote, submit is grayed out for me. I'm assuming that means on the poll. Do you have a suggestion for that, Jennifer?
Just continue to make sure you fill out all 6, and once I end polling, it'll auto submit.
Excellent.
So we're almost there.
Thank you.
Giving you about 25 more seconds and we'll go ahead and end the polling. Okay, and we'll share the results. And those with the red or orange color are the majority.
That's great. Oh, this is fun. So it does not surprise me that we have a lot of folks from Buena Vista here, seeing as how the parcel we're going to be addressing towards the end of this presentation is located right outside of Buena Vista. So thank you all very much for participating in that. It is appreciated. Now, without further ado, off we go to the main event. So I am pleased to introduce to you this afternoon the expert in conservation subdivision design, Mr. Randall Arendt. Randall is a senior advisor at the Natural Lands Trust in Medea, Pennsylvania, and the former director of planning and research at the Center for Rural Massachusetts in the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. Randall had Zoomed with us in April and introduced us to the planning approach known as conservation subdivision design. Based on the feedback from audience members of the April presentation and the overwhelming desire in Chaffee County to keep the town looking like town and country looking like country, we invited him back. This time, Randall is not only orienting us to the 4-step process involved in conservation subdivision design, but he will also demonstrate how this approach might look on an actual parcel located in Chaffee County. The idea behind that is we thought as audience participants, it may be easier for us to visualize this approach and the design that results from it if we're able to literally drive by and take a look and envision it in our mind's eye. The parcel was selected based on the complexity of the land use patterns surrounding it and on the complexity of its intended use, as well as its proximity to town and its unique natural features. While the parcel owner agreed to let us use his land or his parcel for this educational exercise about the process, he's certainly not obligated to execute the design. We just appreciate his openness to participating, and thank you. So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce to Chaffee County once again, Mr. Randall Arendt. Thank you for being with us today, Randall.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the invitation to return, and welcome to everybody. Today we're going to be speaking about how conservation subdivision design can be used in those parts of the county that have public water or sewer, or could have common public water or sewer. They might be parcels that could be annexed in to existing municipalities. In April, we looked at a different aspect, which is how you might design a subdivision way out far, many miles from incorporated municipalities, in places that are many miles from public water, public sewer facilities, lower densities, 2-acre zoning. And what we showed is how you could do 1-acre lots with 2-acre zoning and preserve half of the land as permanent open space, and give the landowner and the developer the full density based upon 1 dwelling unit per 2 acres, but trimming the lots down by about 50% so that we get half the land as permanent open space. Now, the same principle can certainly be applied, and we showed one example in Salida yesterday, and today our example is in Buena Vista, and we will get into that specific example in about 40 or 45 minutes, but prior to that, I want to explain what conservation subdivision design is, how you might do it a little bit differently than if it were in a really rural area, because we're looking at closer in parcels that are, better for shorter commutes and reducing the number of cars per household. So without further ado, I think we should go to the next slide, which the first few slides are simply book covers. Much of the information is in Rural by Design, Planning for Town and Country. Becky has distributed them to every municipality in the county, I believe, and it has a loaner copy in her office. And there are several chapters in particular, 19 and 20 in this book, that focus specifically on what we're speaking about today. Another book in the next slide built some of the foundations for the Rural by Design. Envisioning Better Communities had a subtitle of Seeing More Options and Making Wiser Choices. And that's really what I've been all about as a consulting planner and educator for the past 45 years, is showing communities a range of alternatives so they can choose what's best for them. The next slide shows a third book cover, Crossroad Hamlet Village Town, subtitled Design Characteristics of Traditional Neighborhoods, Old and New. And this is essentially a way to look at what many people call the new urbanism, and how that could be applied as well to areas where you want to preserve land for open space, whether they be public parks, greenways, natural wildlife corridors, scenic view sheds. By designing more compactly in a historic, traditional manner, one can easily preserve more land rather than just use it for lawns and streets. The next slide shows an aerial photograph of Poncha Springs, which, if this had been designed as a conservation subdivision 120 years ago, for instance, the open space in the lower right-hand quadrant would be the open space for the neighborhood with water frontage, and it could be a nice park. So this is the opportunity we have going forward to do something like this, but reserving land, really nice key land as a community asset. The next slide is from, did we say that's from Buena Vista? Yes. And this is another example of a good traditional neighborhood grid. And on the outer edges of it, to the left of North Sangre de Cristo Avenue and to the right of Thompson Court, one sees recently subdivided land. And the difference is enormous. On one side of Thompson Court, the houses sit on lots that are large enough to have maybe 3 or 4 homes from the original settlement pattern that as seen on the left of Thompson Court. So we can see how we're really using a lot more land per dwelling in recent decades than we did originally. And that's very wasteful. And one can, if one had built homes, new homes on smaller lots, one could have preserved a good part of the land in the new subdivision as open space. And that's exactly what a conservation subdivision is. Build homes as if they were on lots in historic traditional neighborhoods, and keep the sort of the modern density overall, so that by making house lots more compact, we have part of the subdivision parcel free of homes, free of lawns, free of streets, to function as agricultural preserve, woodland habitat, nature corridors, or recreation. The next slide will show what a house in a typical traditional neighborhood looks like. Fairly narrow frontages, fairly modest front setbacks, good utilization of land. Next picture shows another shot. This is from Sheridan, Wyoming. These communities, as built historically, were very walkable, very livable, unlike suburban developments, which are dependent upon automobile transport, not walkable to schools, libraries, shops, jobs, churches. So we're going to try to get back to this idea of better utilization of the land for more compact development to free up other parts of the development parcel for permanent open space. The next slide, going forward, shows a real-life example from Salida, where this idea, which is not new, was implemented probably 150 years ago. And sadly, this wasn't replicated in other parts of Salida and many other communities in Chaffee County or other communities in Colorado. But here, the land for Alpine Park was set aside before the development was built, and that grid was established as the first thing, and the park was designated all before the houses were built. That's the way to do a conservation subdivision. To be serious about it, you've got to designate the open space before you start carving up the land into house lots. So Alpine Park, as in the next slide, aerial photograph of Alpine Park, shows how it should be done. You designate the open space first, and then decide how to subdivide the rest of the land around it. Great example from Salida. Next picture going forward shows how our Alpine Park here in Brunswick, Maine is used in the wintertime. There's a depressional area that is flooded, so the water is maybe 3 or 4 inches deep before it freezes, and from December 1 until toward the end of March, we have skating almost every day. After it snows, the snow is cleared off, and this is a great way to use community open space. Brings people together. Very healthy, a lot of fresh air, and just the opposite of sitting at home eating some Fritos in front of the television or watching video games. The next picture going forward shows some of the landscape elements in Chaffee County that we'd like to preserve. They're sort of the obvious ones of farmland and lakes and water bodies and hills and view sheds. The next slide shows another wonderful vista with snow-capped peaks and good habitat in an aspen woodland. Next picture going forward shows a stream valley, a meandering creek, undoubtedly a wildlife corridor. So if this were running through a property that I was going to be asked to develop, there would be a nature zone on both sides of this. We wouldn't have house lots backing right up to the edge of the creek. So the next slide going forward shows another example of natural and cultural features. Not one single tree here is worth preserving. Of course, if you come across a really good tree, you want to preserve it, but sometimes it's a group of trees that is worth preserving in an otherwise open and somewhat barren landscape. This is from a conservation subdivision I did north of Dallas about 15 years ago. Next picture coming up shows a line of trees between former agricultural fields. The agricultural fields have been developed on narrow lots, no garage doors facing forward because they're loaded from the back through alleys. But instead of taking the trees down or putting them behind people's houses, the developer said, let's celebrate that. This is a line of mature trees. It would be hundreds of thousands of dollars to create that landscape feature. Yet many, many site designers don't look at that as a potential way to add value to, number one, their client, the developer, and number two, the people that will be living in the community. So when we see something like this, just a line of trees, we can decide to design around it, and here we have a boulevard with an egress on one side and an ingress on the other. The next picture shows another line of trees, but it's a double row, and that was originally a farm lane with farm fields on both sides of the lane beyond the trees. The developer bought this property and thought, gee, that would be a great place to put my entry road along the old farm lane. But the more he thought about it, he thought putting a road there with all that pavement and all that clearing and all that grubbing would kill the trees. So they just paved a narrow greenway strip. This is from the town of Tioga in Gainesville, Florida. There'll be more pictures of that coming up. But that was just a line of trees on both sides of an old farm lane that could have easily been destroyed by the wrong mindset. The next picture coming up shows a line of trees with a little drainage in between. And the drainage was unknown to the developer. It was unknown to the site designer, a big new urban design firm called Duane Plater Zyberg from Miami. They didn't know there was a stream in there until some people started to remove the undergrowth and the lower limbs. And then when they saw what a gem they had, they decided to redesign their development. After it was approved, they went back and said, this is phase 2, so we don't have to start it tomorrow, but we'd like to rearrange the streets and the house lots so that we get a boulevard entrance with this in the middle of the boulevard. And the next slide shows how you can do this without any trees at all. It was simply a ditch between two cotton fields in Wilmington, North Carolina. So imagine a completely barren site, two cotton fields with a ditch running across the middle of it. Now you have to have a good deal of imagination to see this in your mind's eye. But that's exactly why I'm showing these pictures, so that when anyone walks a property to think about how you might develop it, you'll look at it with very critical eyes about what could we do with this to make value to the project for the developer and for the people that live there. Going forward into the next picture, we see a cover of a subdivision regulation book published by the state of Virginia. And this is one way to divide land into half-acre lots with water and sewer. The cul-de-sac that goes, well, I can do it with my cursor. Jennifer can go on it as well. This is Mirror Pond Walk, this cul-de-sac. But clearly you cannot walk to Mirror Pond from Mirror Pond Walk. You might be able to pole vault in. But this is a really, I think, stupid design. And to put this on the cover of a statewide publication just compounds the stupidity. Pardon me for my language, but that's the way I think about it, and I won't pull punches. Now, I redesigned this for the benefit of the Commonwealth of Virginia, and the next slide shows my redesign. For the developer's benefit, we preserve the same number of lots. In fact, I think I put 1 or 2 more lots in. And 40% of this land is now free of houses because we shrunk each house lot by 40%, from 20,000 square feet to 12,000 square feet. So the lots could be 100 by 120 or 80 by 140, plenty big. In fact, larger than what I'll be showing at the end of this slideshow. But here we have a development where the pond and the park add value to every single house lot in there. So this is I think a good introduction to what and how you can take a bad idea and work with the density and work with the site features and find which site features add the most value, put a green line around it, and then start the development after you've green lined the most valuable site features. Going forward to the next picture, we see a community-wide map. This is a township in Chester County, Pennsylvania, and the unbuildable land, floodplains and wetlands mostly, some steep slopes, are in black. And we know that's going to be open space because it's unbuildable. Now the choice is whether to build on the yellow farmland and preserve the light green woodland, or to do the opposite and build on the woodland and save the farmland. Well, in this township, they decided to build on the farmland because farmland was in decline, and woodland was already very much diminished by centuries of deforestation. So the light green and the dark green there are the primary and secondary conservation areas. Primary unbuildable, dark green. Light green is secondary conservation areas buildable, but we'd like, if at all possible, to preserve that going forward without impacting negatively any landowner or any developer. The next slide shows what another township did in Pennsylvania. They took a tax parcel map and green-lined in an advisory way the land they wanted developers to stay away from. So that you have the riparian woodlands on the left, and then you've got other green areas which encompass a lot of the other woodlands. So wherever there were woods in this largely open agrarian landscape, they said, stay away from that. And you might think the developers were unhappy with that arrangement, but they weren't. They said, if we're going to go in the direction of preserving land as open space, we would like to know what the community wants first, so we don't come up with 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 plans trying to guess what you guys want to preserve. So it's really helpful to have a comprehensive plan, maps like this one and maps like the preceding one in the comprehensive plan, which can then inform the way that subdivision regulations and zoning regulations are worded to implement the comprehensive plan. The next picture going forward shows a close-up of the slide from 2 pictures ago, where we had the township-wide map, and pay attention to where the green is and the black is in this slide, because the next picture going forward shows what a developer did. He took the map very seriously because the codes took the comprehensive plan seriously, and that's a big point. In most counties throughout the United States, the regulations do not take the comprehensive plan seriously. Let me say that again in a different way. In most counties across the country, the comprehensive plan says one thing and zoning says the other. It's like one was written on Venus and the other was written on Mars. I can't explain why that occurs, but just look at your comprehensive plan and what it says about preserving wildlife habitat, travel corridors, scenic viewsheds, rural character, viable farmland, rangeland, ranch land, and then look at the zoning in rural Chaffee County. You've got 50 acres, okay, whack it up into 2-acre lots. Well, what part of that 50 acres can be anything that is going to be preserved if the entirety has been whacked up into 2-acre lots? The same thing in a zone where you might have half-acre lots. If you have half-acre lots in a half-acre zone, you preserve nothing. But if you have quarter-acre lots in a half-acre zone, you can preserve half the land. So this Weatherstone development, this is the sketch plan for the open space that followed from the comprehensive plan map. And the next slide shows how the developer fit the development like a hand in a glove, single family, 2-family, multifamily, commercial, mixed use, and with altogether about 62% open space. That's 50% open space of the buildable land plus the 12% of the land that was unbuildable. So what does Weatherstone look like on the ground? The next couple slides going forward, well, that's just a reminder of that. And this is the detail of the development plan there, where you can see wherever there was woodland, they designed around it. And then they densely designed single-family homes and attached product in the land which was not set aside as open space. Next slide, I believe, shows pictures of what this looks like. This would be some of the attached housing. And because it's alley loaded from the back with garages in the rear, you don't need a street out front. You don't need to spend the money for concrete and asphalt. You don't need all the runoff. The developer saves that money and puts it into open space. And people have a better product with more value because as soon as they walk out their front door, they're on a sidewalk that runs to a park. Couldn't be better. Another picture going forward in the same development shows single-family detached homes. In this case, not alleys. You can see the rear garages facing forward. And on the other side of the street, in the foreground here, is a park, a neighborhood green, which is doing double duty because it's a beautifully landscaped stormwater basin. The next slide going forward shows the beginning of the 4-step design process. We begin the 4-step design process with a very detailed site analysis map as shown on the hood of the car. And then we bring the developer, his engineer, his landscape architect, which I think is as important as the engineer at the beginning of the design process, plus the planning board members and any abutters that wish to come and get an early insight into what might happen with the property. So this is a walk of discovery where the planning board members walk with the engineer and the developer, et cetera, with the site analysis maps in hand so they can see where the trees are of special value, any historical or cultural features like stone walls or cellar holes or wells or farm lanes or old farm ranch houses, tree lines, fence lines. And then walking the property, you really get to understand it. This is in Sheridan, Wyoming, and we walked that property about 10 years ago in a demonstration conservation subdivision I did there. Maybe we can do this in Chaffee County sometime if I can, get on a plane eventually and come out as I was supposed to in April. And we walked that property and then went back and collaboratively designed a conservation subdivision. So there's no substitute to actually walking the property. The next picture shows the beginning, I think, of the 4-step process, and this is a bird's eye view of what a property looks like today. The bottom half is all buildable. The top half is wet woods, wetlands and floodplains. So we don't even count that in terms of acreage because you can't get any density in the wet, flood-prone woods. So all the density is calculated on the basis of the farmland. And we see historical elements there. We see on the center left the original manor house for the plantation in New Bern, North Carolina. We see the alley of trees leading up to that house from the state highway. We see outdoor rooms bounded by lines of trees. We see a pecan grove right in here. We see the viewshed, the rural character viewshed, as seen from the public road. So there's a lot going on the left-hand side of this property. Let's see what a developer normally does with the zoning in place. That's what he does, because zoning allows him to do it. Zoning allows the developer to ignore the comprehensive plan. Comprehensive plans are advisory, zonings are mandatory. How do we fix that? We make our zoning consistent with the comprehensive plan. Now, that's a radical idea. That's revolutionary in the United States, to make your regulations consistent with your comprehensive plan. But that's what I'm suggesting, that we actually have consistency between the regulations and the planning. So instead of building this is what I call a yield plan. It tells us how many developable lots the developer has, and that's fine. So going forward, we build that number of housing units. The four-step process begins with step 1A, primary conservation areas unbuildable. These are the wetwoods. The next slide shows the secondary conservation areas, which is all buildable. And the left-hand side of this is all historic. So going to the next slide, we see what we want to preserve and where we want to develop. There we go. What we want to develop is the right-hand side of the farmland. The left-hand side of the farmland is all very historic and viewsheds from the road, North Carolina Route 43 out of New Bern. So the end of step 1 is to green line the open space. Remember, all of those woods in the top are unbuildable, and all that we're really preserving that it was under threat of development is half of the buildable land on the left-hand side of the farmland. The next slide shows the second step. After the first step, the second step is to put in streets and squares as terminal vistas. The third step in the next picture shows locating houses, and the fourth step is to draw in the lot lines. And what we see when we get to the next slide is that the lots are very small on the right-hand side, the extreme right, and in fact, some of these are attached houses, townhouses. Then we might get to detached townhouses, and then single-family on slightly larger lots, and single-family or two-family on larger lots than that, and then estate lots that buffer the high-value land that was going to be carved up into just a bunch of house lots. And the most expensive part of this property is right here. And the developer can sell that for millions of dollars because he didn't mess up with the yield plan. So I think the next slide shows us the yield plan again. No, it doesn't, but we'll get there soon. So this is the bird's eye view of what this would look like, with fairly dense, fairly compact, new urban, traditional neighborhoods on the right, and a proper conservation area with all the historic and scenic and cultural landscapes preserved on the left, in addition to the natural areas in the woods. Next slide shows the yield plan, which is what most developers do because that's what zoning makes the most easy route. If you want to have the least amount of time in planning board meetings, you do the conventional development. I would suggest that any county that wishes to have the results that I'm illustrating in this talk make this type of development a conditional use or a special permit, and developers won't go there. Make the conservation design the default, by right, easy to do, easy to approve option. Make what you're seeing now the difficult one to get approved because it's a conditional use or a special exception. And that is one way of turning the tables so that the comprehensive plan policies stand a fighting chance of being implemented. The next picture, I'm not sure what it shows. It's going back to the bird's eye view of what we want to see rather than what the zoning typically tells us we can do in the easiest, most expeditious manner. So zoning is backwards. What is conservation design? What it is not is clustering or PUDs. Clustering or PUDs is where the open space is mostly unbuildable wetlands or floodplains, and nor is it a golf course development. So the next slide shows a typical cluster from Wyoming, and most of the open space there, which doesn't look bad, is unbuildable land. It's floodplain or wetland. So very little land has been preserved there. The next slide is also from Teton County, Wyoming, and again the same thing. The open space down the middle is a nice greenway, but the developers pushed the development right up to the edge of that, and the open space is largely just slivers of land behind house lots, rather functionless. So this is a really good example of a bad planning technique called clustering or planned unit development. And it is because of these examples, and like them all across the country, that I stepped back about 20 years ago and defined a new way forward, which is conservation subdivision design. Next picture going forward shows Battle Road Farm from Lincoln, Massachusetts, which features multiple housing types for three groups: seniors, affordables, and market rate. So we have wooded wetlands in the middle, and we've got woodlands around the edge, and we've got a town meadow in the middle. So we've got a variety of different open spaces, different functions. And there are a lot of trails that actually go through the wooded wetlands because it's not a swamp. It's just, what we call a red maple, stand of red maples here in New England. Next picture going forward is the aerial photograph of Lincoln, of Battle Road Farm in Lincoln, Massachusetts. What does it look like on the ground? Next couple slides show a picture. This is a bird's eye view of that meadow and the homes which front onto the meadow. And these homes are all 3- and 4-family homes built to look like large single-family homes. So that's the secret, is in the architecture as well as in the site planning. Good site planning and good architecture make a great project. And this is affordable housing, it's senior housing, and it's market rate, and you can't tell which is which. Once you get inside a unit, you can see whether it's large or small, whether it has special wood features or not. But from the outside, you wouldn't know. Next picture is another shot of the same green from a different angle, and the next picture shows one of these other large farmhouse types. This is a typical northern New England farmhouse, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maine. We have these to connect the barn to the main house so you don't have to go out on the snowdrifts when you go out and need to milk the cows twice a day. So this traditional New England vernacular housing type, big house, little house, back house, barn, became the prototype for the multiple housing in Lincoln, Massachusetts. Next picture shows another example of what we call pocket neighborhoods. And these are small, modern homes that are built around a neighborhood green. And you can get 10 of these on an acre easily. So it's very high density and very much sought after. These are typically high-end developments for empty nesters, single-parent households, small households of 2 people, maybe no children in the picture. If you've got 3 children and 2 dogs and a boat, this is not for you. Although when you're 68 years old and your circumstances are very different, and you've got rid of your boat, this might be where you want to live. The next picture shows an actual photograph in the middle of one of these, very popular in the Pacific Northwest. Next picture shows another example of this without as many people, but on the left you might think, well, that's attached housing. It isn't. Those are detached townhouses. Detached townhouses, meaning it's a townhouse type of unit, maybe 22 feet wide, maybe 23 feet wide, but separated from each other by, say, 10 feet. A village green in the middle and a community building at the end. Now, these can be done in an affordable manner, too. The next picture is from Boulder, Colorado, and it is a wonderful development called Poplar Gardens. And there are 14 units on 1.2 acres, if my memory serves. It's about 20 years old. It was done by an affordable housing group in Boulder. All the units are accessed from the back. They've got an alley on one side and an alley on the other side. And most units have garages. Some just have carports. The next picture shows Poplar Gardens from the street. So as you're driving down the street, this is what you see. And there wasn't a tree on the site when they began. So all the trees there are, 20 years old, which is, it shows how quickly these things can look like they've been there forever. Next picture shows, next three pictures, in fact, show internal shots of the village green. This is looking down the green, and I said there are 14 houses, and 14 houses is typical for these bungalow courts or pocket neighborhoods. And the final slide is another internal green picture, but taken from maybe a drone, I don't know. This is a close-up showing the alleys and the parking areas, and the next picture shows an actual street-level view of the alley in the back. So the beauty of this is because the cars and the garages are essentially out of the picture. They're where they ought to be, in an accessory area behind the buildings. This has been so popular that no one has moved out voluntarily. When people die, they're moved out, but they're there until they die because they can't find anything as nice as that. So congratulations to Affordable Housing in Boulder for doing this. Too bad they haven't done more of it since then. And I think it's largely because of a lack of housing sites. But in Salida, in Buena Vista, Poncha Springs, et cetera, we may have lots of opportunities for this. Now we're on to Becky, maybe for question and answer at a halftime.
You bet. Thank you, Randall. I was just jotting down a question that an audience member sent in, and it was, can you give some examples? And I think you've kind of been doing this all along, but just to kind of reiterate, the question was what communities in the United States are practicing these principles and have the proper zoning to support their comprehensive plan and conservation subdivisions. And I would say that many of the examples are in this book that I was able to purchase with grant money. So our planning departments all have a copy of this book, and I have a couple in my office to loan as well. And they are full of case studies that demonstrate where communities are practicing these principles. Did you have anything to add to that answer, Randall?
Well, within the 550 pages, there are 900 photographs. So when you pick up the book and you say, well, this is over 3 pounds, I don't know if I can handle it. First of all, you can, because it's all written in day-to-day language, non-technical stuff. And secondly, the pictures make it a real easy read with lots of captions. But you really only have to look at 2 chapters, Chapter 19 on conservation subdivisions and Chapter 20 on conservation subdivisions in water and sewer areas. That's, for today. For Chaffee County rural area, you want to look at Chapter 22. But you'll see how many communities, at the end of Chapter 19, I go state by state for the states that have had the most activity with this type of development. Now, most of my business travel in the last 20 years has been east of the Mississippi. It's easy for me to get there from the East Coast. I've always lived in the East Coast and never further south than Philadelphia. So I'm sort of a Yankee. But I've been to every state in the 48 contiguous and have done slideshows and presentations in every state. And you can see some conservation subdivisions in Colorado. The rural type near Durango, there's a wonderful example that's in the book called Heartwood Community. And of course, the Boulder example that I just showed. In Pennsylvania, where I spent about 20 years, I think there are probably 40 or 50 townships that have adopted this. We don't do county-wide zoning in Pennsylvania, but in the book, at the back, it'll talk about county-wide zoning in places like Hanover County, Virginia, where they have preserved 5,000 acres of land in conservation subdivisions. And Hanover County, Virginia is not far from where Jennifer lives. Kent County, Maryland, another one with lots of examples. There is a county in Michigan whose name is eluding me at the moment, but it has got like 30 or 40 examples. So there's some hot spots. And around Milwaukee, there's one development company called Seepman Realty. So if you go online, and they're mostly suburban. They wouldn't be new urban. They wouldn't be rural. But every subdivision Seepman Realty has done in the Milwaukee area in the past 55 years has had significant open space. So they're the industry leader for Wisconsin. So you need to go into the book to get a full answer there.
Great. So
other questions?
Yeah, there is questions. I'll follow up on that book statement for a moment. Like I said, I have a copy in the Office of Housing that's available for loan. And if you want to purchase your own, you can skip Amazon, go directly to a website, greenerprospects.com. That's Randall's website, and you can find the book there. There's another question.
Cheaper than Amazon, because I don't like the way that the publisher has jacked up the price of the book. They have not improved the book. The book is exactly the way it was 5 years ago, but now they're charging $20 more for the same book. So I don't jack up my price.
Very good, thank you. One question came in. You used a phrase, terminal vistas. Could you explain what that phrase means?
Terminal vista is a term often used by new urbanists who are largely architects that want to look at streetscapes and make them more traditional for a lot of good reasons, not just aesthetics, but livability and social aspects, and good for the environment. People walk more and drive less. So in the new urban context, when a street, and we'll show this in the next, maybe the next 5 minutes in slides, when a street ends in a square, a neighborhood square, the vista is the neighborhood square. Sometimes in an urban situation, a street will T-bone into another street, and at the end of that is a church or a public building like a library or a city hall, specifically aligned in the line of sight to become more prominent. What I like to do in conservation subdivisions is not put a building or a statue or some built thing in the terminal vista, but something green, like a neighborhood green. And we'll show that in actual slides in a few minutes. Easier to explain.
Very good, thank you. The other question that came through that's less technical, but a good question nonetheless. You gave an example of a development that contained equal portions, senior housing, affordable housing, and market rate housing. And the question is, what was the impetus that caused the developer to do that?
This is an unusual situation, but it's replicable. And I put it in the book because any place can do it. In Massachusetts, municipalities are under the gun. If they don't have 10% of their housing stock affordable, then a developer can march in and build almost anything he wants. He can exceed zoning by 800% legally. So towns there take affordable housing seriously because they don't want a developer coming in saying, I've chosen this site over there and I want to jam 8 times the density on that. So they want to get out ahead of the developer. So Lincoln bought this land, with town money, town meeting, a lot of discussion, bought this land, and they said, we'd love to have one of our affordable housing projects there. Not the only one that the town has done, but this is the one that I like the best. And they bought the land and then put an RFP into the Boston Globe. Architects were invited to submit sketch plans for X number of units, which exceeded the underlying density, so that the developer would be given a density bonus to have some affordables in there. So Lincoln Planning Board received, I think, 10 packets from designers, mostly architectural firms. And they were in the position of looking at all 10 and tossing 9 out and selecting the best. They were in the driver's seat. It wasn't the developer coming in and said, I'm choosing this land over here, and here's my design, and you better approve it. It was, we have selected this property, and these are the parameters. And the parameters were not only affordable, the parameters were open space, trails, New England Village Green, vernacular New England architecture, and they got it all. And the developer built it, and it was a financial success. And I love it. I mean, if I wanted to live that close to Boston, which I don't, that would be a prime place for me to live. It's, to live that close to Boston in an affordable unit or a senior unit in such a wonderful setting is a gift. So yes, municipal leaders in any town or city in Chaffee County could do something on a smaller scale, but they could acquire a parcel and set the parameters and invite developers to submit proposals based upon what they want to see. Sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that example. There's an example of a similar approach in Colorado known as the Miller Ranch. It's over near Eagle. And that one was interesting because it was a public-private partnership. It was publicly owned. The developers offered proposals based on an RFP. At the end of the development, though, the developer and the housing authority, who originally owned the land, split the profit. So there was no federal money put into it. There was no taxpayer dollars put into it after the land was purchased. And then the public was reimbursed through the revenues realized by the developer. So a very interesting example. Thank you. I do have.
Well, when I do the revision to Rural by Design, I'll put that in.
It's a nice one. I'll share contact information with you. I do have another question in the queue, but I'm going to save it for later because it's a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of comprehensive plans and zonings, etc. So I think we should pause right now on the Q&A, and we'll go back to your presentation. Okay,
good. Well, foreground meadows is another concept I like to build in, and we did it yesterday with Ned's property in Salida. As the next picture shows, a foreground meadow on the right is when you separate the development from the busy road by open space, and you front your homes so that they are facing the public road at the bottom across the open space. That might be 75 or 100 feet deep. Whereas on the left-hand side is the typical way that developers and site designers design when they're along a busy road. They can't have curb cuts for driveways because they're not allowed. So if you can't have a curb cut on a driveway, the standard response is, well, let's back the houses up to the busy road where we can't get curb cuts. But that's kind of miserable. It looks not so great as you're driving by, and it's not such a great backyard that you've got in that situation. So on the right is a foreground meadow. On the left is a missed opportunity. Now, the next picture going forward shows an example where the setback is clearly more than 75 or 100 feet. This is more rural. It's in Ohio, probably up near Cleveland, and there are horses paddocks in the front. So that tells you something about the rural nature of this, and it's a great way to separate the busy road from the homes. Now, these homes could either have a narrow street in front of them, or they might just be alley loaded from the back and have no street at all directly in front of the house. We'll get to that point again in another slide. So next picture going forward shows another example. Well, this is what we call a close, and it's a substitute for a cul-de-sac. So you drive in like this. Let's see. Yeah, you drive in around and out just like the arrow is showing. And instead of there being a cul-de-sac circle at the far end, there's just a loop. And in the middle is a park. And that park can be landscaped, and it can actually be a depressional area that collects the storm water from the streets. So this is a 100-year-old example from Mariemont, Ohio, and it's called a close or a loop lane. Another example of this in the next slide. Well, no, this is the same picture from the ground level, not just an architect's drawing. And today, if we were to do this again, we would make that curving loop at the end more generous. We would give it a radius of about 165 feet, which is the radius of a cul-de-sac circle. But instead of having a great circle of asphalt, we have a gracefully looping street with the same geometry as a cul-de-sac circle, so that moving vans and long vehicles like that can turn. Here are two examples, a small one and a big one. And as I said, the middle can be an area for trees and shrubs that like extra water, because you can make that into your stormwater area. The next picture going forward is kind of an engineering drawing of what it looks like. So that if from one side to the other, the area in the middle is probably about 85 to 100 feet across. And the lanes that encircle this are a one-way lane going around, and that could be paved to be maybe 14 feet wide. So you could have one parking lane and one travel lane on that 14-foot width. And it's just for a cluster of, say, a half dozen homes. There's actually an example of that in Longmont, Colorado, and it's in the book. It's in the Rural by Design. So go look up closes in the Rural by Design. The next picture, I think, is the title slide that are going forward again. Green streets. A green street is a street that is, instead of asphalt, it's grass and trees. We have two sidewalks, but between the sidewalks, we don't have a street. And how do you access the garages? From behind. So it works very well for access, and it works as a way of adding value and livability to the neighborhood. The next picture, I think, is an aerial photograph, which shows the alleys on the far left and the far right. And what we could do is we could replicate this to the left and to the right. So between the east-west streets at the top and the bottom, between the east-west streets, we need cross streets. We just can't have these green streets. But every other cross street could theoretically be a green street, or it might be one out of every 3 or one out of every 4 cross streets is a green street. So we can replicate that going to the east and going to the west, just having more green streets. And we can also do it going north and south. So take that existing green street in the middle and extend it to the north, 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks, 4 blocks. Extend it to the south, 1 block, 2 blocks, 3 blocks, 4 blocks. Why not? Then you've got a continuous greenway that might go 10 blocks. Connect your home to your schools, to churches, to the shops, safe routes to school for the kiddies. It's just a wonderful idea. And for every square yard of asphalt that you replace with grass, you increase the permeable area and decrease the impervious area, which is very good for aquifer recharge, particularly in arid areas like where you live. And you might say, well, what keeps this green where you live? And the answer is you might do xeriscaping there. This is in Celebration in Florida. No, it's in Baldwin Park in Orlando, Florida, near Celebration. So you do xeriscaping in the middle, but you would also have the rooftop drainage and the sidewalk drainage going into that middle area, which you might plant with native species that might only need 15 inches of rainfall a year, and they're happy. So this could be done in Chaffee County as well as in Florida, where this one is from. Next picture of a green street shows a narrow one from the Kent lands in Maryland. And going forward to the next slide, we might skip to a narrower one yet. And it's got a sidewalk down the middle. Now, the one in Florida I prefer because it's got a village green kind of running down the middle with two sidewalks. This is just sidewalk and front lawns. So it's not as nice, but functionally it's wonderful. The developer calls this kid streets, and he does them in all his developments. This one is from Aurora, Illinois, which is maybe an hour west of Chicago. So this is another example of a green street, but a narrower one than the one that you saw with two sidewalks a moment ago. Next, going forward to the next slide, we can actually front homes directly onto the open space, like we did in the last few slides, but instead of it being a green street, these homes front directly onto a small neighborhood green. It might be 5,000, 8,000, 10,000 square feet. It doesn't have to be big. It's a small neighborhood green. It could be larger, but it doesn't have to be. Next slide shows another example of fronting homes directly onto a village green. And this is a riparian situation where the river is on the far left outside the camera frame, and the brick wall is the top of the bank. So these homes face the river, and there's no street in front of the homes. These homes are all accessed from the back. It's in New Point, South Carolina, and it's in the town of Beaufort, South Carolina. And the developer deliberately did not give these homes individual water frontage on the river. The water frontage is shared by all 50 homeowners, not just the 10 or 12 that front onto the river, which means that the value of the river, the communal dock with the mooring spaces, the riverside park, adds value not just to the 10 or 12 houses you see in this line, but to every house in the development. That's why this developer was so intelligent and made so much money. He did not squander his river frontage on 12 lots. He made the river frontage an amenity for all 50 lots. The next slide shows another example of fronting, in this case, a townhouse onto a small, say, 5,000 square foot neighborhood park. Behind me, where I'm standing with my camera, is the sidewalk and the street. So that's not a very big park, but it pushes the townhouses back from the road, makes them quieter, and makes, as a real estate investment, a far better proposition than putting the townhouses right at the edge of the street. Next picture going forward shows single-family homes, which I call detached townhouses, at the top and on the left that directly front onto the triangular park. The houses on the bottom and the right face the park from across the street, and every lot in there has a rear access garage to a back lane. Next picture shows where this really exists. What you saw a moment ago was the sketch. This is the aerial photograph, built just the way it was drawn. So you can see how the homes in the upper left-hand corner have such a close relationship to the park. Adds the value. These lots are 40, 50, and 60 feet wide in a zoning district where they typically had to be, I think, 100 feet wide. This was done under a planned unit development ordinance that gave great flexibility to the developer. But like most planned unit development ordinances, it didn't have any design standards on how to do it well, which is why many, many planned unit developments are not done well, because they don't have the design standards in them to say, organize your density in a way that will preserve the open space behind the homes, going down to the river on the right-hand side, and give you a central focus with this triangular or trapezoidal village green in the middle. Beautifully done, and sold like hotcakes. Next slide shows some pictures from that development taken on the ground, so you can walk off your front porch right onto the village green. Next picture is from another direction, the same village green with no street frontage. These homes have no street frontage, so the ordinance says 0 street frontage required as long as you have functional access to an alley. And that's the way this works. The fire marshal was happy with it too. Next slide going forward shows how garage door orientation is really important. If the house is, if the lots are so narrow that the house takes up the entire lot, and here this is a duplex, it's a really bizarre look where you have to look long and hard to find the front door. The garage doors dominate. The next slide shows pretty much the same thing with a longer line. This is the front of these homes, I kid you not. And in your urban community, that would be the alley view. It wouldn't be the front. But this is a supposedly nice development in Georgia, and this is the way it came out, because it's townhouses with garages facing forward. You can't do it unless you're happy with this. The next picture shows another example, and these are 3 homes on 100 feet. So each lot is like 32, 33 feet wide. And we knew how to do this 120 years ago, but we've forgotten. We've had this national amnesia. We know how to get density and to do it well, even with single-family detached, without garages dominating the fronts of homes. So this should be, I think, mandatory that when you get below maybe 60 foot of lot width, you need to have a rear access garage, unless you're a corner lot, when you can have a side access garage. That's the only way to stop developers doing front garages on narrow lots, is to say when the lot gets below 60 feet, you got to do an alley. Next slide shows a beginning of detached townhomes. These are affordables. They're 17 feet wide. The lots are about 23 feet wide, and there's 0 lot line. So one side of every building is on the lot line, and the gap between it belongs to the house whose other side is on the lot line. And you might say, well, what do you, that means you have at least one functional side yard. And some people put a deck on that, a little deck filling up that, say, 8-foot gap. How do you get privacy? By putting the windows at different heights or different locations, so no window looks into another window. You might have windowsill heights of 5 feet above the floor level on one house, so that it doesn't look into the window of another house except to look up to the ceiling fan. Okay? So if we have windows that face each other, one of them has to have a clear story window with a sill that's 5 feet off the floor, or 5.5 feet off the floor, and you don't have any, or you juxtapose the windows so that they don't look into each other. Or in the extreme situation, every house has side windows on one side and blank on the other. So you get windows on 3 sides, but not the 4th. But the 4th side might be the clear story side. So there are a lot of ways to do this so you don't have privacy problems. So this is affordable housing Davidson, North Carolina, not townhouses, detached townhouses, which was what people with a townhouse budget vastly prefer. And I'm told by a developer that he can build detached townhouses cheaper than he can build common wall townhouses because he doesn't have to have the expensive fire-rated wall between the units because he's got the space between the units. So this is actually less expensive than common wall because you daylighting and ventilation on four sides. Next slide shows another example of detached townhouses of a more elegant and upscale way. So detached townhouses do not have to be just affordables. Next picture going forward shows a Charleston double-decker porch example, and next picture going forward shows a North Carolina variation on this from the Raleigh area. Next picture going forward shows kind of a Hansel and Gretel house from the 1930s, and the garage is front-facing, but it's in the back, so it's visually subordinated. So you can have detached houses and detached garages if you wish, and the garages can be front-facing, but they must be behind the homes. Next picture shows not such a great example, deliberately not such a great example. When we have wonderful examples, why would we want to have one like this with a garage door so close to the street? The garage door should be further back if it's front-facing, in my view, or it should be alley-loaded from the rear. So this is an example of what I would suggest not featuring in your community. Next picture shows two-family design, really ugly, from Sheridan, Wyoming, with virtually no front doors except for the cars. That's a duplex house from Sheridan, Wyoming, in a planned unit or cluster development. The beautiful front yard, all Portland cement, easy to sweep and keep clean. Next picture shows another duplex, which is a little bit better, but it still shows your garage doors front and center. But it is done better than the Sheridan example. This is from Vancouver Island. Going forward, we see further examples of two-family design with back lanes from the 1930s. So garage doors, and it's a really nice twin house, common wall in the middle, but the garage doors are not messing up the streetscape. The next picture shows a better example of that, in my view, architecturally. Again, alley-loaded, but it's not the only way you can do it. The next picture is another example of from Eagle, Colorado. The next three are from Eagle, Colorado, in fact, where that's a duplex, but you wouldn't ever believe it. And there's another duplex, which is a little bit more believable because two front doors face forward. The next picture is again from Eagle, but it's another one of these like, where's Waldo? Where's that second front door? You don't see it unless you're really looking for it. And, of course, they're alley-loaded garages. The next picture is the final one from Eagle, and you see two front sidewalks. That's the giveaway. But it's not much of a giveaway. You drive by and you think, well, that's a nice single-family house. But if I had to live in a duplex, I'd rather live in a duplex that looked like a big single-family house than one that looked like it was exactly what it is. Another example going forward is multifamily without back lanes. Next picture shows multifamily is all parking in the front, or next picture, not all parking in the front, but parking on the entire ground floor. So when you walk in your house, you got to climb up a flight of stairs to get into your house. Not an ideal example. What's ideal is the next picture, which shows multifamily with back lanes. This one from Davidson, North Carolina. The next one coming up is from Seattle area, Puget Sound. Beautiful, contemporary, common wall, multifamily, but obviously the garages are behind. Next picture shows another good example from Dover, Delaware, a three-family attached product that faces the street, with a modest front yard and a great, backyard between the houses and the garages and then the alley. Next picture, I think we're going to look at some more three-family homes from Eagle. So here's one single three-family home from Eagle. The next slide is the second three-family home from Eagle. The next slide is the third three-family home from Eagle. And the next slide is an aerial photograph of that last project, where you can see McDonald Street runs down the middle, and everyone's front door faces McDonald Street, and all the alleys, all the garages face the alleys in the back. So that's the secret. It's a simple formula, but unless we enforce it, we will see examples of developers putting in front-facing garage doors on two-family and three-family homes and on single-family where the lots are less than 60 feet, which means that the double garage door is going to dominate any single-family home on a 55 or 50 or 45-foot lot. So there's a solution to that. You don't allow front-facing garages on narrow lots. Next picture shows Tweetons, which are mid-block walkways. We're almost at the end. A beautiful picture from the 1920s of affordable housing built for shipbuilders in World War I. And the Tweeton is this little pathway on the right. So it's a long block. In order to get from one block to the other in the middle of the block, you create that. New urbanists in the next picture have recreated the Tweeton in Seaside, Florida. But it was done in the 1920s in Radburn, New Jersey, in the next picture, for an affordable housing project called Radburn in Fairlawn. And there's another mid-block connection, pedestrian connection, great for kids wanting to get to school quickly, great for commuters wanting to walk to the Amtrak station, which is about 5 blocks from where I'm standing there. Next picture, we're getting really toward the end, terminal vistas. A terminal vista, if we can bring our cursor down in the middle, coming down to the green, from the top, you see the green as the end of the street coming down from the top. And that's because there's a little curve in the road, and the village green is a sort of a diamond shape. As we continue along the curving street toward the bottom of the picture, your terminal vista is out to the green space where we see Ashby Drive. As you go along Ashby Drive in either direction, your terminal vista is on the outside edge of the curving street, which is where you want to put the green space to be noticed, not on the inside edge of the curve. Next slide shows this same kind of example from Harbortown in Memphis, where the diagonal street is coming in from the upper right, and the terminal vista is the green in the middle. Next picture shows a ground level view of that same kind of arrangement from another part of Harbortown. So the end of the street is something beautiful. It's a park and it's a gazebo. It's not, a municipal building, which I think is fine in really urban areas, but not in neighborhoods. So the next picture going forward shows how to design around really large trees. In Tioga and near Gainesville, this was that old farm lane, and the developer kept those beautiful big oak trees as part of the project. But I can guarantee you, having been through many developments in Alachua County, Florida, where this is located, most developers don't look at the trees as a value-adding feature. They just bring it to the engineer and say, how many houses can you create on this property? And he takes a standard cookie cutter and the trees are gone. But if we are freed from the standard cookie cutter by the flexibility of conservation design, then we can do something really creative. And the next slide shows how you get your density. Because the house lots are small. Some of them in the lower left-hand corner are townhouses, more townhouses down in here. This is mixed use with residential above commercial. So he's got plenty of density there. And he kept all the trees down the middle. That was the first thing that they did. And the designer for this, the sketch plan designer was the developer's son, who was a trained architect. So he took an architect's eye and worked with the engineers to create a good engineering plan with the benefit of the architect's vision. And landscape architects have that same kind of vision because that's the training they get. So it makes a great team. The engineer teaming up with the landscape architect or the architect. Next picture shows another good view of that greenway through the middle of Tioga in Gainesville. The next picture is the Buena Vista case example. And here we're winding down to the end. These are some of the vistas from Jed Selby's parcel, and the views are typically outstanding. And we want to orientate, we want to preserve those views and preserve the land in the pivot agriculture. Next slide. Next two slides show more examples. This is the pivot irrigation, and a thank you to Jed for saving this meadow and this picture. So we're about to save another meadow in this exercise, and the land we're going to be dealing with is here. It includes all the land in the southern half, which is largely a field. The northern edge of it is a stream corridor, a wooded stream corridor, and there are some woods above that, but there are too, in my view, it's too challenging to put houses in. Best just leave it the way it is and get your density somewhere else. Leave that wooded area to the left of the pond as it is, if possible, because it's kind of a magical place that even one or two homes could, completely alter. The next picture going forward is basically a picture of where the trees are and where the white area is the agriculture. So we're going to go forward in that and say, well, we know what we want to preserve. We want to preserve in what basically the trees and the riparian areas and the pond. And if we, I don't know, this is cut off a little bit at the bottom. I don't know where we can get that to go up. It's probably my fault, cropping it wrong. But this is an example of how you would maximize the density, which is what Jed didn't want to do, but do it in a somewhat interesting way with, on the lower left-hand corner, a meadow with homes ringed around it, and then a crescent up in here with views to the mountains. And as you say down on the left, in the lower left-hand corner, the idea of that was views to the southwest, because the views of the mountains to the southwest are pretty outstanding. And then up here on the top, we have an existing design with an alley, so I just built onto that. And this is a floodplain over in here, so we couldn't build in that. But Jed said, well, no, he's not interested in that much density, and we'd rather have lots that are smaller. So instead of 50-foot lots, which these are, the next picture shows 40-foot lots, 25-foot lots. And we kept the entire pivot area free of buildings, and this is the one that Jed really likes. And these homes here have western-facing views and eastern-facing views, west across to the mountains and east to the farmland. And these homes here have southwest-facing views to the mountains across the farmland. And these houses here basically have south-facing views to the trees and the water bodies. So this has got more house lots than the last one, I think, because they're a lot smaller. And you could even do multifamily in here. There's no reason you couldn't. This could be a three-family house. These could be attached townhouses, or they could be detached townhouses. We've seen some from Davidson, North Carolina, that are on 23-foot lots, 17-foot homes. So there's a lot of scope for creativity, and this is the design that Jed likes and I love. And I think some version of this, you might very possibly see coming out of this process, which is basically an exploratory, quick and dirty design. And typically I'd walk the property, but I couldn't get there from here because the airlines, I don't feel comfortable. I'd have to take 3 flights and sit in 3 or 4 airports. So that's why I didn't come out to walk this property. You blame it on the pandemic. That's the only reason I'm not out there. Time for more questions and answers, specifically about that property or about anything else, about the regulations. Fire away.
Thank you so much, Randall. And let's keep your contact information on the screen for a moment while we talk, in case someone wants to write that down or check out your website. I have a couple of questions and a comment, so I'll just start with the comment. And this came from one of our audience members who said, I have a dry creek running through my yard. All rainwater from the roof is diverted into the dry creek. After being constructed 7 years ago, there are many volunteer flowers growing in it. I also sprinkle seeds from time to time. It only gets rain and rainwater runoff. So it's possible in our arid climate to design, I think is the point of this comment, to design our space in such a way that we can use the water appropriately to enhance our features.
Exactly right. And there's the technical word is xeriscaping, which basically means dry land landscaping. So you speak with people that know about native plants, flowers, shrubs, trees that grow well with whatever you have, 15 inches of rainfall a year, 20, I don't know. It's pretty dry, and we can't afford the luxury of irrigating lawns and landscaping anymore.
That's right. That's right. And the next question was about the terminal vistas, the neighborhood greens, the conservation areas. Who ends up maintaining, owning, and paying for that? Do they get donated to municipalities? Are they treated as open space in an HOA? How does that typically work?
Well, it can be a variety, even on one development. For instance, in Jed's, the land in the pivot area might well be retained by the developer, but with a conservation easement on it, if it's a conservation subdivision, so that we don't see more houses go in there. Or if houses are going to go in there, it's a certain limited number in a certain limited area. But that is all ironed out at the beginning, the maximum extent of the development. So developers can retain land if they wish to. In most cases, the neighborhood greens belong to the neighborhood, the home association. And the home association has mandatory membership, automatic membership, and the dues are not great. They're not high because it's simply mowing the grass if you've got grass, very seldom because, it doesn't grow that much because you're not going to water it that much. You're going to have dry climate grass, or you're going to do other types of sort of native ground cover in there. You're going to be planting cottonwoods, for instance, unless the fluff bothers you. The community, broader community, like the city of Salida, the city of Buena Vista, probably is not going to end up owning any of this unless it wants to. For instance, there might be a greenway to a dry gulch or maybe along a creek with water that runs through it, and the city might say, hey, we'd like to have a public path along that. So they work with the developer. They can't require a developer to give that to the city, but they might come to some understanding that public access will be allowed, or maybe it won't, but the conversation can happen. Typically, cities don't want to take on more parkland, but that can change if it's particularly nice and if it connects a whole lot of other neighborhoods. So that can be a very valuable linear park for the city to plan out in their comprehensive plan and work with developers to implement.
Excellent, thank you. So then, it also tied to the open space. One of our audience members says, I might have missed it, but in the Meadows example, What was the big open space being kept open for? Farming?
In JEDs?
That's correct.
Yeah. The pivot area is being kept open for farming. The curving nature of the open space is where the pivot irrigates.
Okay.
So Jed told me that his idea is to keep that in farming, for the foreseeable future. And I think that's great. Now, ultimately, if irrigation becomes a real problem, you might move to some other type of dry land use for that area. And that could feature more into wildlife habitat and planting native vegetation. But I think we're decades away from that. But ultimately, the West might run out of water. I hope that you don't continue to be so popular that so many people from California and the East and the Midwest continue to move to the mountain states, because I just been reading a lot of Wallace Stegner and what he wrote in the 60s, 70s, 80s before he died. And it's clear that the West has got a carrying capacity. Mm-hmm. So I hope that us Easterners and the Californians and other people don't continue to move there and put more pressure on your precious water supply.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Another question I've been saving, because now we're starting to get into the policy questions. One of our audience members writes, why is there such a disconnect between comprehensive plans and the actual codes? What are the obstacles to making the actual codes match the visions outlined in the comp plan? And how do we get over them? How do we address
the only obstacle is political will. So you need to point out to the community all the good things within the comprehensive plan, how many months or years was spent putting in it, how many volunteer hours, how many dollars, and let's compare that with the zoning and see if there's a good match or no match at all. And that is a revelation that needs to happen, because most people don't look at the two books together. But if the zoning ordinance were to say the developer has got to implement these comprehensive plan policies from Chapter 9, Section 9.4.3.2 in his conservation subdivision, the comprehensive plan would be taken off that dusty shelf and be consulted again. So the zoning and the subdivision regulations need to specifically link to chapters and verses from the comprehensive plan. The other way of making consistency is to rewrite the comprehensive plan to say, just kidding, we'd like all of the open space in Chaffee County to be divided up into large lot subdivisions. And who gives a hoot about animal habitat or travel corridors? We certainly don't. I mean, you can make it sort of humorous because there are only two ways to get consistency, and that is bring the zoning and subdivision up to the level of the comprehensive plan, or dumb down the comprehensive plan so it meets current zoning.
Very simple is the way that you described that. Thank you. One of our audience participants sent a note that says in Colorado, we have the ability through our state statute to require consistency.
Yes. That ability exists in Florida and in New Jersey. Visit Florida and New Jersey to see how much that ability to be consistent has actually made a difference. The difference is actually going to happen only at the local level. If the state legislature gives you the ability to be consistent or says you should, with an advisory note, should be consistent, not much changes. So I'm glad to hear that people have the ability to do that because we don't have a legislative obstacle. The only obstacle is that people don't yet realize the long-term consequences of implementing the zoning that is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. That's up to you guys.
Excellent food for thought for our community as we have been engaging in a comprehensive planning process that has been fairly significant and pretty robust. And there's been a lot of community input and conversation around it. So I appreciate you making that distinction. We have just a couple more questions, but I'm thinking that while we are queuing those questions up, Jennifer, perhaps you would want to share the post-event poll so that folks are able to start clicking on these numbers, or I'm sorry, on their answers while Randall and I continue the conversation with the questions. One question came in terms of costs. So if we look at the purchase of conservation easements, which is one way our community has obtained conserved lands. If we look at the cost of subsidizing builds so that we get affordable housing, a lot of those costs are borne by the public. And so the question is about how does this approach of conservation subdivision design impact the developer's bottom line? How do they manage the upfront costs of engaging the additional landscape architect instead of just going straight to the engineers? And how does that kind of play out over the pro forma of the development as it unfolds?
Excellent question. Developers benefit. The National Association of Home Builders and the Urban Land Institute have been pushing conservation subdivision design for 20 years. They wouldn't if their members were going to get the short end of the stick. But developers build shorter streets, sometimes skinnier streets, shorter runs of water and sewer lines. They have faster sales velocity. They can charge lot premiums, and you get to the affordability through a density enhancement. There's nothing negative in it for the developer at all. Developers have understood that open space sells homes for a long time. They're called golf course developments. That's the original conservation subdivision. But sadly, a lot of those golf course developments never had conservation easements on them. So last time I was in Orlando at a ULI conference, I was having lunch with these guys, these developer guys, and they were telling me about how 7 golf courses were currently being carved up for more housing. And they said, isn't it great that no one asked us for a conservation easement on the golf courses 30 years ago? So now we're going in and double dipping. And you can tell that the people that bought the golf course houses around the golf course are not happy campers. They're not happy golfers. There is no more golf course because golfing is passé. It really is. It's a declining industry. So, but for 35 years, developers were building golf course developments, setting aside huge amounts of land, no less than 200 acres, 120 acres. That was the minimum, 120 acres for 18 holes and a clubhouse. And the payback they got on that, after spending $10 million on irrigation, making the roughs and the greens and the hazard areas and the ponds, and the very expensive golf course architect, landscape architects had only in their dreams earned the money that a golf course architect used to be able to charge when golf courses used to be designed. I say past tense because that's pretty much the case. So developers were setting aside 120 acres and sinking in $10 million and still making a profit. Now in a conservation subdivision, you don't spend $10 million. You set aside the land, but people pay you more because of the open space. In most golf course communities, something like 40% of the people that lived there didn't play golf. They just wanted to be there to look at something green and peaceful. They didn't want to look at their neighbor's barbecue or, hear the neighbor's kids splashing around in a swimming pool. They wanted the peace and quiet of a golf course. So golf courses have run their course, so to speak, and they're, in many cases, in many parts of the country, they're just being torn up. It's a declining industry. So developers make more money because they sell homes faster, They can charge a premium price. They build less infrastructure. They do a lot less site grading. Pushing dirt is like pushing bricks or pushing lead. Dirt is heavy stuff. So if half of your land you don't have to push a bulldozer around, you've made a lot of, profit right there.
You mentioned you mentioned less streets. So the green streets that you mentioned and the tweens, I think is what you called it. Those are all amenities that cost very little compared to built out infrastructure. I think that's very interesting. Yes. Well, Jennifer, it looks like she has shared our polling results. And at this time, it seems that it is very important to the people who have participated, for the most part, that our local policies and systems would encourage this type of subdivision development. Thank you all for participating in that poll. The results, of course, will go into our grant report, but will also be included in a report back to the municipalities within Chaffee County. So, Randall, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. I thoroughly enjoy our conversations, and I thank you for the time you've spent with us in Chaffee County yesterday and today. I hope that you won't be a stranger, and when you are comfortable once again traveling via air, please do come visit. We would love to take some walks with you.
I was scheduled to have a couple nice soaks in your hot springs in April, and I'm just waiting for Jennifer to put a button on there that says, now you can soak in really warm mineral water. But I can't do that from here. It's been a pleasure too, and I hope that we can join forces again whenever the opportunity arises.
As do I. Look forward to it. Thank you all for attending this afternoon. Randall, be well. Jennifer, thank you for your assistance.
My pleasure.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Have a good night.
Okay. Bye-bye.